Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. 3 people are killed in the Kyiv region after overnight Russian strikes, Ukrainian officials confirm. Both sides trade drone attacks as the conflict continues to escalate around their capitals. In the largest exchange of the war, Russia and Ukraine trade 307 troops each as part of a 1,000 prisoner deal. Trump says the move could open doors to peace talks, while Moscow plans to submit a formal memorandum after the swap. An all-party Indian delegation led by Congress MP Shashi Tharoor pays tribute at the 9/11 Memorial in New York as part of an anti-global terror outreach. The visit underscores India's call for united action against cross-border terrorism. An Israeli airstrike on Khan Yunis kills 9 of Dr. Alna Najjar's 10 children minutes after her husband dropped her at work. Israel says it targeted militants near troops, but the incident, part of over 100 strikes in 24 hours, is under review amid rising civilian death toll. A university field trip ended in tragedy as a bus carrying students and professors crashed in Western Colombia, killing at least 10 people. Authorities are investigating the cause as survivors recall a sudden loss of control before the deadly impact. North Korea has arrested shipyard officials after a failed warship launch damaged a 5,000-ton vessel in front of Kim Jong-un. State media says the incident hurt national dignity, prompting harsh rebuke and promises of punishment from the leader. French police are investigating possible arson after a fire knocked out power across the Alpes-Maritimes region, including Cannes. The outage disrupted the world-famous film festival, with authorities exploring if the blaze was deliberately set. South Western Railways returns to public hands, marking Labour's first step in renationalisation Britain's rail network. Transport Secretary called it a watershed moment in putting passengers ahead of private profit. Our top story today: Russian strikes have killed 3 people in the Kyiv region overnight, according to a Ukrainian official, as the two countries fired drones towards each other's capitals. This comes as Kyiv and Moscow carry out the biggest prisoner swap since the start of Moscow's invasion. Russia's overnight attack on Kyiv wounded at least 10 people, according to Vitaly Klitschko, the city's mayor, who also warned residents to stay in shelters. Moreover, overnight attacks were also reported in Kyiv and Kherson regions. Meanwhile, in Moscow, restrictions were imposed on at least 4 airports, including the main hub Sheremetyevo, as part of the Russian Civilian Aviation Authority. Mayor Sergei Sobyanin said that the 12 drones flying towards the Russian capital had been intercepted. Furthermore, after overnight drone and missile strikes on Kyiv overnight injured at least 15 people, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has once again raised calls for sanctions on Russia. Here's what he said.
Був дійсно масштабний та підлий російський удар. Балістика, частину ракет вдалося збити. Було також 250 дронів, більшість шахедів. Щоночі наші сили працюють для захисту життів. На все це потрібна реакція. Жорстка реакція Сполучених Штатів Америки. Реакція Європи. Реакція всіх світів, хто хоче завершення війни. Путін відмовився від припинення вогню вже неодноразово. Це нічого йому не дає, крім того, що кожного дня він забирає життя. Кожен день дає приводи для нових санкцій проти Росії. Кожен день доводить, що без тиску на Росію війна триватиме.
We're now joined by Professor Veselin Ivanov-Popovsky, who's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School, New Delhi, India. Thank you very much, Professor Popovsky, for joining us on the program. I first of all actually want to start with this prisoner swap that's just occurred, the largest prisoner swap of the entire conflict. I was wondering, does this, because this was an agreement made in Istanbul after their first direct talks, does this signal a diplomatic opening, or is it purely a pragmatic move, do you think?
I will go with the second, Thomas. It's a pragmatic move. It doesn't need a meeting on a high level in Istanbul. Those swaps can be decided by the generals in the battlefield. They happen all the time in every war. In the First World War, Second World War, between the worst enemies, such swaps are possible. Between Israel and Gaza and Hamas, they also happen. Yes, the attempt by the Russian side in the Istanbul negotiation to put this as a big achievement actually is not. It's something very normal under international humanitarian law to swap prisoners of war. It happens all the time, even back in centuries. So this is probably another attempt by Russian propaganda to show this as some willingness to negotiate, but we don't see the actual negotiations for a ceasefire. Russia continues to deny even a 30-day, not an unconditional ceasefire, something which is on the table for many, many weeks now, including by the US administration, by all the Europeans, and by Ukraine. So yes, swaps do happen. They are part of international humanitarian law, but I wouldn't say this is some achievement. And exactly the strikes you mentioned, Thomas, the continuous shelling of big cities, including Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, shows exactly the opposite. Russia is unwilling to negotiate even a minimal ceasefire.
Precisely what I wanted to speak about next is the fact that these global peace talks are on the world stage. Everyone's looking at what's going to happen, whereas this conflict is still escalating. People are still being killed, as you said, in Kyiv. It happened today, 3 people killed in the Kyiv region. Can I get your thoughts on the current state of what's going on the battlefield and the possible backdrop of peace? Are we anywhere closer to it, given the current actions of both Russia and Ukraine?
On the battlefield, there is not much movement, and this is why the news goes into those strikes on civilians in Kyiv and elsewhere. So it's a stalemate. The Russian army cannot advance much. We see for the last 10 months very minimal territorial gains. They couldn't even get to Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is a kind of a big village, if not a town, and even they cannot get that. Not to mention other big cities in Donetsk and Zaporozhye. So Russian army can only hit civilians. I have the impression only they cheer about if they kill those 3 people in Kyiv, and that's what they consider to be a military success. Obviously, it is not. On the battlefield, Russia doesn't have any success. Well, they cleared Kursk's region, which was a Russian anyway, so it's not even that any military victory. So stalemate on the battlefield. And what we see is actually more willingness and more unification between major players, United States. The G7 finance ministers agreed on sanctions on Russia, including United States. So apart from Donald Trump talks, there is a lot of diplomacy on a lower level in the US. We saw Lindsey Graham making a strong speech against Russia, accusing Russia of aggression. And Lindsey Graham is one of the most prestigious Republican senators. So we will see over time pressure on Russia, more sanctions, including by United States. I wouldn't even exclude China of putting some pressure on Putin to agree on a ceasefire, and during that ceasefire to have time to negotiate all the other issues, territorial issues, sanctions, security guarantees, and so on.
Professor Popovsky, we've obviously seen sanctions imposed on Moscow since the start of this conflict. As you've said, they've agreed to new sanctions, but are there any other levers that Western governments still have left against Russia, or is it purely left to those two men, Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, to agree on something that seems pretty out of reach right now?
Apart from sanctions, there should be also a strong support for Ukraine, including military. So the answers here are sanctions do work over time, obviously. The Russian economy cannot survive with mobilization of many countries to impose sanctions on Russia, including financial sanctions, but also it is important to support daily Ukraine. And it means not only financial, but also military support. And many countries do that. They support Ukraine militarily, financially, even politically, even statements in support of Ukraine and accepting the Ukrainian peace plan, what Zelensky proposes, diplomatically through ambassadors will be all very useful. So strong sanctions on Russia, strong support for Ukraine, and careful with negotiations, because only if Ukraine is on the table of negotiations, no negotiation without Zelensky, I will simply put it this way.
And finally, I just wanted to touch on the position of the United States, which has been ever-changing, especially after, obviously, Donald Trump came to office on January the 20th. We saw the US even side with Moscow a couple of times at the United Nations. What are your thoughts on where the US might lie in the current state of negotiations to end this war, which it says it wants to?
Yes, very disappointingly. In the beginning of the Trump administration, we saw that, those voting in the General Assembly together with Russia, absolutely unbelievable historically. But over time, we see that even the US administration is learning slowly. Again, law competent people learn slowly. We understand that, but they learn over time. The Trump administration realizes who is on the right side and who are their true allies. And these are the European Union, Canada, Australia, South Korea, other countries, Japan, and so on. So over time, we see a building unified front against Russia. And although Trump is trying to make some financial deals in Russia, that's my understanding of those visits by Steve Witkoff to Moscow, somehow to try to get some money out of Russia, but these are financial deals. And even Witkoff stopped going to Moscow. So everything which you mentioned, Thomas, is correct, but it kind of applies in the past. We hope this doesn't continue in the future.
Professor Veselin Ivanov-Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We now move on to the Middle East, where rescuers in Gaza say an Israeli airstrike has killed 9 children belonging to a married pair of doctors in the southern city of Khan Yunis. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reported that the children of Dr. Hamdi al-Najjar and Dr. Ala al-Najjar died in the strike, with the parents and son seriously wounded. Let's take a listen in to what the niece of Hamdi al-Najjar had to say.
Uncle's wife, Dr. Ala Amin al-Najjar, she's a doctor for the children. She treats children, and in a moment, her daughters and her sons, with her hand died. Yahya, Sidra, Luqman, Sadin, Rival, Jubran, all of them died between his hand. She left the hospital, walking on her leg, reaching to Khizan al-Najjar.
Footage from the aftermath showed rescuers recovering charred bodies from the family home. Israel's military has said that it is reviewing this attack that killed 9 of the 10 children in Khan Yunis. In Tel Aviv, Israeli protesters rallied once again, calling on the government to secure a hostage deal and end the war in Gaza. Demonstrators held signs and chanted slogans demanding the release of captives still held by Hamas since the October the 7th attack. Let's listen in to some of the protesters' comments.
This government must go away. I think everything else will be better than this government who does such a damage for all of us. Israelis, Palestinians, all the area. It's just
We want the war to end now because we see no future to this process. We see that the war will not lead to the release of the hostages and that it will bring more death, more misery on both sides, more soldiers to be killed.
In a related development, Israel is investigating multiple cases involving its own soldiers allegedly forcing Palestinians to act as human shields in Gaza, a practice the Israeli military says is strictly prohibited under its orders. In a statement, the Israel Defense Forces confirmed that several investigations have been launched by its military police criminal division following reports that Palestinians were coerced into participating in military operations, including being sent into buildings and tunnels to check for explosives or armed fighters. The announcement follows a report which cited testimonies from both Palestinian civilians and Israeli soldiers. According to the report, the use of Palestinians as human shields has come widespread during the conflict. Meanwhile, Malaysia's foreign minister has condemned what he called atrocities in Gaza, following the international community of double standards and difference to the suffering of Palestinians. Speaking at a regional ASEAN meeting, Minister Mohammed Hassan has said the violence reflects a breakdown in respect for international law. We stay in the Middle East now, where 9 al-Qaeda members were killed in US airstrikes on southern Yemen, as stated by a Yemeni security official. The strikes hit mountainous areas of North Khabar al-Marwasha in Arbian province on Friday night, a known hideout for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, also known as the AQAP. A local leader is believed to be among the dead. A tribesman at the site described seeing charred bodies and a burnt-out vehicle. Initially, 5 militants were reported dead, but the toll rose to 9. According to updated information from security sources, the AQAP was once seen by Washington as al-Qaeda's most dangerous branch, formed in 2009 through the merger of the group's Yemeni and Saudi factions. The group has thrived amid Yemen's civil war, which began in 2015 between Iran-backed Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition supporting the internationally recognized government. Earlier this month, the US agreed to a ceasefire with the Houthis, ending weeks of American strikes triggered by Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping. Despite recent calm, US counter-terror operations against the AQAP continue, with targeted strikes in remote areas of southern Yemen. The Yemen war has killed hundreds of thousands and left millions in a humanitarian crisis, despite a UN-brokered truce in 2022 that reduced major fighting. We stay in the Middle East. Damascus has announced a major overhaul of its interior ministry. The move comes after the United States and European Union lifted long-standing sanctions on the war-torn country. The new structure includes a modern civil security force, a citizens' complaints force, and a new border body to tackle drug and human smuggling. This restructure marks a shift towards transparency with a strong focus on combating the Captagon trade that has flooded the region. Embassies are reopening, tourism police are being deployed, and the government is promising to respect international human rights standards. Meanwhile, US Syria envoy Tom Barrack met interim President Arem al-Shara in Istanbul. He reaffirmed Washington's support for the Syrian people and said the sanctions lift was aimed at strengthening the fight against ISIS. President Shara also met Turkish leader President Erdogan to discuss regional security and counter-terrorism cooperation. We move on once again. Congress MP Sashi Thardor and members of an all-party parliamentary delegation arrived in the United States as part of India's global outreach on Operation Sindoor and its fight against terrorism. During an interaction at the Indian consulate in New York, Thardor briefed the audience on the recent Pahalgam terror attack, which claimed the lives of 26 innocent civilians. He detailed India's subsequent counter-operation, Operation Sindoor, and strongly underlined Pakistan's role in orchestrating the deadly attack. Take a listen.
I say only to send a message about terror. We are not interested, and we still remain absolutely clear that we are not interested in warfare with Pakistan. We would much rather be left alone to grow our economy and pull our people into the world that they're getting ready for in the 21st century. That the Pakistanis have. Sadly, we may be a status quo power, they are not. They are a revisionist power, they covet territory that India controls, and they want to have it at any price. And if they can't get it through conventional means, they're willing to get it through terrorism. That is not acceptable to us, and that's really the message that we are here to give all of us, all of you in this country and elsewhere.
Earlier, Thardor and the delegation paid tribute at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum in New York, describing it as a deeply moving moment. Thardor emphasized the need for a united global stand against terrorism. Accompanying Thardor were members of the multi-party delegation who joined in paying respects to the victims of the 9/11 terror attacks. Additionally, another multi-party delegation also arrived in Bahrain's Manama for India's global outreach program. Another all-party delegation led by Supriya Sule also arrived in Qatar as part of the government's coordinated international campaign to spotlight Pakistan's terror links and reiterate the significance of Operation Sindoor. The Sule-led team includes leaders from across party lines. The delegation is scheduled to travel next to South Africa, Ethiopia and Egypt as part of India's outreach across 33 global capitals. We're now joined by Rabinder Sachdev, who is a foreign affairs expert located in Singapore today. Thank you very much, Rabinder, for joining us on the programme. This global outreach tour has been going on now for a week. What does this tour, what message does this tour put across that the original Operation Sindoor didn't?
Yeah, thank you so much. A pleasure to be with you. You know, you were playing the clip of parliamentarian Shashi Tharoor, and he's known for his mastery of English language. I would actually like to take this occasion to slightly improve what he is saying as to distill the message. Because India needs to have a clear message. The message, I think, which Tharoor is making and which Prime Minister has said is Pakistan has to learn to live and let live. Period. The point is, what is India's end goal? These delegations have to tell that to global audiences also, right? Sure, if terror strikes are there, India says that we'll give you a tit for tat plus kind of a thing. Fair enough. But what is the end state, end goal that India would like to have ideally? And that end goal, end game for India is, as Tharoor says, that we don't want warfare, right? So the end objective is that Pakistan must learn to live and let live. And I think if all our delegations are carrying this brief message, this one-liner, that should be the top-line message to my mind. In any case, all delegations are, conveying similar mind views of India, I would think.
Rabinder, do you think India is trying to internationalize the issue of Pakistani-sponsored terrorism in the way that Ukraine has internationalized Russian aggression? Do you think that not enough countries understand or have had the message conveyed to them of Pakistan's role in these terror attacks?
No, certainly. India is trying to raise the issue. It's not that the world leaders especially do not know what Pakistan is doing. or its devious tactics. It's just that many world leaders do not have interest in this issue, right? They do understand, yes, what Pakistan is doing is playing games with India, promoting terrorism, but they don't see it hitting themselves, and there are layers of aspects to that. In some countries, let's say the US particularly, before Trump came, it was supposed to be the white racism which was the number one terror in America. Remember, Biden in his inaugural speech said that the number one challenge our country faces is white racism. So for them, white racism was a much bigger danger than Islamic terror. So they don't have the mind space to allocate there. Now with the coming of Trump, of course, I mean, all US administrations have been chasing down the extremists and you're showing as Al-Qaeda and all, etc. But now with Trump in power, the more focus for Trump and his administration is within America, the liberals, because they fear that the communists are taking over America, right? For them, those are the bigger dangers than Islamic terror overall. Okay, sure, but then also a regional India-Pakistan issue. So the leaders do know, are aware, I think. So what India is trying is definitely, yes, informing the world leaders, but I think India is doing another. India is warning the world or pre-warning that if the next time something happens, we will be going in for a much bigger kill, right? So there's a warning also. It's not only awareness and education that the dossiers that what all India has faced via Pakistan. Fine, that has been known. Dossiers have been given by missions zillions of times, I would assume. Okay, so repeating the same logic will not open the door anymore. To open the door more, India is clearly saying that it's a warning. That's a warning now, right? So the world can sit up and take notice that something next should not flare up. And that flare up could, even go, let's say, nuclear, as is being tossed around, may not, right? So one, India is warning that please rein in Pakistan or things will go down the spiral. One. Second, or rather first is, all we want, our end game is Pakistan must learn to live and let live. Second, it's a warning to the world.
Rabinder Sachdev, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move on. ASEAN leaders are gearing up for their 46th summit in Kuala Lumpur, with talks set to focus on the crisis in Myanmar and tensions in the South China Sea. Secretary General Kao Kim Horn says the bloc is responding to Myanmar's situation both as a group and individually, including the aftermath of the recent earthquake. On the South China Sea disputes, he confirmed that the ASEAN and China are still committed to finalising a deal by next year. The two-day summit, beginning on May the 26th, will also see the launch of ASEAN's Community Vision 2045, a long-term plan to strengthen regional integration and partnerships. Leaders will unveil 4 strategic plans to boost cooperation across member states. The ASEAN chief says this isn't a reactive move, but a visionary step towards shaping the region's future. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
Key issues and the main agenda for the 46th ASEAN Summit is the signing of the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 and the 4 new strategic plans. Myanmar is an issue because the ongoing developments in Myanmar, including the recent 7.7 magnitude earthquake, and how ASEAN has been responding, both collectively and individually, to that earthquake, as well as the ongoing developments inside. The issue, of course, is the ongoing negotiations for the code of conduct in the South China Sea, which, of course, both sides, meaning China and ASEAN, are committed to finalize this negotiation by next year.
We move on once again. In a fiery speech at West Point, US President Donald Trump addressed the military academy's 2025 graduating class, praising the Army as the greatest in the world and claiming credit for rebuilding it. Wearing his signature Make America Great Again cap, Trump used the commencement to mix encouragement with a sharp attack on policies he calls woke. He took aim at diversity, equity and inclusion programs, vowing to ban critical race theory and transgender initiatives in the military. Trump said the military's job is to dominate any foe and not host drag shows or transform foreign cultures. This marks his second time speaking at West Point. His first was in 2020 during the height of the pandemic. Since returning to office in January, Trump has moved quickly to roll back progressive military policies enacted under Joe Biden. Let's listen in to what the US President Donald Trump had to say.
You are the first West Point graduates of the golden age of America. This is the golden age, I tell you. Promise. We're in a new age. This is the golden age. We've liberated our troops from divisive and demeaning political trainings. There will be no more critical race theory or transgender for everybody forced onto our brave men and women in uniform or on anybody else for that matter in this country.
Moving on now to South America, a university field trip in Colombia turned deadly on Saturday. At least 10 people were killed and 11 others were injured after a bus carrying students and staff crashed in the western region of Quindío. Authorities say the driver lost control while crossing the Helicoil Bridge. Several passengers were thrown from the vehicle into a ravine. The bus was carrying 26 people from Tolima to Quindío, including 22 students, 2 teachers and a communications officer from Humboldt University. The university has declared 2 days of mourning to honor the victims, including students, faculty and administrators. Road accidents remain a major threat in Colombia, which reported an average of 22 traffic deaths per day in 2024. That's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.